Good evening, I'm Claudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has just sat down with U.S. President Donald Trump for talks in Florida as the world is watching and wondering if the talks will land Ukraine a lasting ceasefire. We're here to bring you more. A security agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine will be strong, Donald Trump told reporters as he greeted President Zelensky at his Mar-a-Lago residence. Are Ukrainians hopeful about how today's talks could affect the course of the war and possible peace? Let's now go live to our correspondent Cezary, who is on standby in Kyiv. Good evening, Oz. So we've just heard Trump and Zelensky speak briefly. What are the key issues on the table and what are the Ukrainians thinking of the outcome is going to be?
Well, President Zelensky revealed the 20 points from at least the Ukrainian perspective last week. So we have an idea of what is going to be discussed. There are obviously some contentious issues included in that, including potential Ukrainian withdrawal from Donetsk, something the Ukrainians say they'll only agree to in some sort of economic zone. And if so, that would have to be done including a Russian withdrawal. And it would also have to include referendum to be passed. So very, very difficult. And to do that, Ukraine needs a ceasefire. So we end up going back to many of the previous rounds of negotiations. So they're trying to finalize these talks, but there are still some very, very strong points of disagreement. And the big one as well is security guarantees for Ukraine going forward to try and enforce any kind of ceasefire. Now, President Zelensky and Trump spoke just before they went into that meeting. Here's what they had to say.
We will speak about 20 points plan. There in 20 points plan, 90% by the way was done by our two teams. I think they made a great job, great work, and yes, we will discuss these points also.
And there are great economic benefits for Ukraine also. Because, you know, there's a lot of rebuilding to do, and there's a lot of wealth to be had. And they have great wealth. Potentially, they have great wealth. They want to get started. But there's a great economic benefit for Ukraine.
So during the presser, Donald Trump said that he will call Vladimir Putin after the meeting with Zelensky. He also held a call with him right before the talk, which, according to the Kremlin, lasted an hour. Is Vladimir Putin trying to convince Trump not to give in to Zelensky's revised plan?
Well, what Putin is trying to do is only something him and people around the Kremlin could tell you. But really, the tactic from the Kremlin has been to try and push their demands over and over again, the same demands, without showing any kinds of concessions. Now, President Trump said that he would hold further rounds of negotiations with Russia, but they also talked about setting up some sort of working group between the US and Russia to go forward on certain ideas, certain economic pathways that they can rebuild ties. These all sound like things that would come after a peace deal, but really the difficulty will be for Ukraine to try and get its points of view on here. I think from the European perspective, at least, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk summed it up as President Zelensky was heading into those talks, saying, "Good luck, Zelensky." It's clear that President Zelensky needs luck in this talks to try and keep Donald Trump on side. So that is something clearly Putin is hoping he can continue to have that influence over the White House's policy towards the Ukraine-Russia war. But it remains to be seen how exactly this meeting is going to pan out. We are going to have a further round of press conference after these talks conclude. There's also going to be a joint phone call with European leaders. So much more to come, and we'll keep you all informed of that right here on TVP World.
Thank you very much, Oz. Stay warm. That was Cezary reporting live from Kyiv. And now more of today's top stories. Poland set to complete its drone wall project within 2 years, says Polish Deputy Defense Minister. Well, Serbian students' petition forced President Vučić into calling a snap election. And French cinema legend Brigitte Bardot dies at the age of 91. But first, back to our main story, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. As Zelensky and Trump meet today in Florida to discuss further terms of the ceasefire, a significant development took place around the subject of the Zaporizhzhia plant. The facility is going to be able to undergo a necessary reconstruction of power lines as the International Atomic Energy Agency brokered local ceasefire. What happens next to the plant is a different story, as Russia wants to maintain control over the facility, with Kyiv warning the modernized plant in the Russian hands would pose a nuclear risk. Natalia Komarov reports.
As Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stepped in to negotiate potential peace terms with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump, one big item on the agenda is the future status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest nuclear facility. The International Atomic Energy Agency managed to broker a local ceasefire there to allow necessary reconstruction of power lines around the plant. This after Russia launched a devastating attack on the city of Zaporizhzhia on Christmas Eve, damaging multiple residential buildings as well as energy infrastructure.
Director General Grossi thanks both sides for agreeing to this new temporary window of silence in order to restore power transmission between switchyards of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant, strengthening nuclear safety.
The UN atomic watchdog has been monitoring the situation in Zaporizhzhia since Russia occupied the nuclear power plant in March of 2022 and later annexed the Zaporizhzhia region in a sham referendum. De jure, the plant still belongs to Ukraine, but Moscow has been attempting to connect it to the Russian power grid. There's just one problem. According to the director of the Kyiv Energy Research Center, the Russians do not possess the know-how to operate a nuclear power plant modernized using Western technology.
In independent times, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was dramatically modernized. It's very different from with the station which was built in Soviet time.
Kyiv says Moscow has been using Zaporizhzhia as nuclear blackmail. For example, in June of 2023, Ukraine accused Russian forces of blowing up the nearby Kakhovka dam on the Dnipro River, destroying the Kakhovka reservoir that was used for cooling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactors. Since then, all 6 reactors have been shut down.
It's not served in proper way. It has no maintenance for 4 years. It has no proper service related to everyday functioning. And it's in cold mode, which never happened in worldwide nuclear history with nuclear power station at all.
Which is why the question of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is a key point in the ongoing peace negotiations. While Moscow believes it already belongs to them, Kyiv is neither willing to give it away nor to engage in joint management, which has been the latest proposal from U.S. negotiators.
Some of these things that are being thrown out, whether it's about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactor, which Russia seems to want to hang on to, possess, even after this is done, or what you do with that piece of Donbass. That has to be flanked with all kinds of security measures that the Europeans and the Americans are willing to prepare.
If and when diplomats manage to reach a peace deal, it will be crucial to allow engineers and scientists into Zaporizhzhia to ensure the security of Europe's largest nuclear power plant. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Poland plans to complete its new anti-drone fortifications along its eastern border within 2 years. That's according to Polish Deputy Defense Minister Cezary Tomczyk, who spoke to British newspaper The Guardian. This follows repeated incursions by Russian drones into Polish airspace. The project, costing more than €2 billion, will integrate new air defense systems into an older line of border fortifications built around a decade ago, according to Tomczyk. He said the layered defenses would include machine guns, cannons, missiles, and drone jamming systems. The Polish Deputy Defense Minister also said most of the funding for the drone wall would come from European funds allocated under the Safe Defense Loan Program, with additional state budget contributions. Meanwhile, Poland is also fortifying its borders with Belarus and Russia, Kaliningrad's exclave, under a project known as the Eastern Shield, aimed at deterring a potential future Russian invasion. The pressure on the Serbian government is intensifying, with protesters calling for a snap elections at hundreds of standpoints established for citizens to sign a petition to force President Aleksandar Vučić to call an early election. The efforts come as the U.S. increased external pressure on the country by introducing sanctions on its only petrol producer, NIS. Sonia Gatabishtan brings us more on social unrest in Serbia in her latest report.
Serbian students are calling for snap elections, and on Sunday they intensified their efforts to make sure that happens. At almost 500 standpoints across 100 municipalities in Serbia, they invited citizens to sign a petition demanding snap elections from the Serbian president Aleksandar Vučić.
The purpose of today's initiative is to show the scale of support for the student movement.
I was among the first who came here early this morning to sign the petition these young people put forth. I think this is a magnificent idea. This student movement cannot be compared to earlier ways of confronting this government. This is authentic, new, and different from anything else.
Serbian students have been protesting for over a year. The movement began following a fatal collapse of the canopy of the railway station in Novi Sad in November 2024 that killed 16 people. Protesters blamed the tragedy on corruption and considered the government illegitimate.
I think this entire year plus has been really struggling and difficult for President Vučić. This is by far the largest crisis that the Serbian Progressive Party and him individually have been faced with ever since they've assumed power in 2012.
Part of the reason behind that is also external pressure. In October, the United States sanctioned Serbia's only petrol producer, NIS, as part of broader measures against Russia's energy sector, with the company being majority owned by the Russian energy giant Gazprom.
If you go to the gas station that's owned by NIS, you can't pay with a Visa card. You can only pay for certain things with cash.
But while Vučić is already feeling the heat, some experts note that exerting even more pressure could be in the best interest of the region.
Without a peaceful Serbia and democratic Serbia, there is no also peace in the whole region in the Western Balkans. This is the question of national security, and that's precisely why the European Union should put more pressure on the government of Serbia to push for democracy.
Serbia has been a candidate for EU membership since 2012, but some experts suggest Vučić may not be in a rush for the country to join the bloc.
Because he has consolidated power in his hands, and his ultimate goal is to remain in power for as long as possible. And of course, he is going to say all those words, how he wants to join the European Union, because he needs the European Union money for his political survival. But his heart is actually in Beijing and Moscow.
The situation in the country prompted the European Commission to publish some of its harshest criticism to date in its 2025 report on Serbia. The Commission was particularly concerned about fundamental rights in the country, noting instances of violence against protesters and journalists, including excessive use of force by the police. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishtan.
Polling stations across Kosovo have closed following the second general elections of 2025 in the country. The results of the vote will be known on Monday. The vote is the second this year in Kosovo after Prime Minister Albin Kurti's nationalist Vetëvendosje party fell short of a majority in February. Months of failed coalition talks prompted President Vjosa Osmani to dissolve parliament in November and call an early election. The political deadlock has not only paralyzed parliament, but also delayed international funding for Kosovo. Failure to form a government and reopen parliament would prolong the crisis at a critical time. Lawmakers must elect a new president in April and ratify €1 billion in loan agreements from the European Union and World Bank that expire in the coming months. She was one of the most iconic actresses of the 20th century. Today, on December 28th, the world said goodbye to Brigitte Bardot, who died at the age of 91 at her home in Saint-Tropez. An artist, an activist, and a legend of the French movie industry, Bardot's influence reached far beyond film into music, fashion, and wider popular culture. Aisha Badji has more on the life and legacy of the star.
On vient d'apprendre la mort de Brigitte Bardot.
Non, c'est pas vrai.
France reacts to the death of their beloved. Brigitte.
The iconic actress of the 1960s has died.
The woman who, in her prime, put the bikini, female desire, and French cinema on the global map, passed away at the age of 91 in southern France.
She was an icon and a character, and above all, she was very independent. She rejected the system pretty quickly.
She was a free woman, and I feel like we don't see many women like that anymore.
Born in 1934 to a wealthy Parisian family, Brigitte Anne-Marie Bardot started out as a ballerina. As a teenager, she became a fashion phenomenon, appearing on the cover of Elle at just 15.
She had her little dress with the Vichy squares, and that was the iconic image when I was 12 or 13 years old.
But Bardot's big break wouldn't come until 1956. The film And God Created Woman, shot in Saint-Tropez by Bardot's then-husband Roger Vadim, challenged societal norms and redefined the portrayal of female sexuality on screen. Bardot's character pursues her sexual desires without shame, until then an attitude reserved for men. The film failed to make money in France but caused uproar in the United States. Many cried out depravity, but Bardot had already become a global sensation. The ardent French feminist of the times, Simone de Beauvoir, hailed her as an icon of absolute freedom, raising Bardot's influence to a philosophical level. But at the height of her career, Bardot had had enough. At 38 years old, she stepped away from the film industry, saying she was tired of being treated as a sex symbol. She then devoted her life to animal rights activism.
For me, Brigitte Bardot represents someone who defends animals.
But the dashing facade also had a dark underbelly. Bardot was convicted several times for inciting racial hatred later in her life. Her son sued her for emotional damage when she published an autobiography in which she wrote that she would have preferred to have given birth to a small dog. And Bardot is survived by her fourth husband, Bernard de Marle, a former advisor to the late far-right politician Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of the National Rally Party. But despite the controversies, Brigitte Bardot was a household name, a notorious rebel, an unapologetic dark feminine. Adieu, Brigitte.
Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's private estate, is where the eyes of the world are turning to today as Volodymyr Zelensky began his meeting with the U.S. president on location at 7:30 p.m. CET. Ukrainian president will present his 20-point revised peace plan. What will come out of this meeting, and could the fate of the war be decided before the new year? To discuss this, Bogdan Nahailo, editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Post, joins me on the program tonight. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining. What a day.
Good evening.
So,
can I just add before you ask your question that Brigitte Bardot supported the first animal protection shelter in Kyiv, and she supported Ukraine in 2022 when Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, and in 2014 2012 I think she wrote a letter to President Yanukovych, expressing her concern about the way he was running things. So, she's a film star, but she has a good name in Ukraine.
Thank you so much for this memento. Definitely an important day, not only in the world of politics. So let's jump into the most recent. Let's take a look at some of the quotes that were said during the presser right before the meeting started, when we saw President Trump and President Zelensky on the doorstep of Mar-a-Lago. Putin is very serious about peace. That's what Donald Trump said. Do you think that after the conversations that were held, there is a possibility that this is true, or is Putin playing Trump as he did the West?
Yeah, we've heard from Putin the last month reiterating what he's been saying for years, that he wants all or nothing, that give me everything I want or I won't sue for peace. I mean, his press conference on the 19th of December, where he made it very clear that he'll continue the war unless he gets what he wants. The so-called historical lands of Russia. Is Poland a historical land? In the 19th century, it belonged to the Russian Empire. Where does it begin and where does it stop? He keeps going on about this, and Trump acts like an idiot and pretends he doesn't know history and pretends this is okay. I mean, what struck me today when I watched this meeting in Florida is the moral equivocation that Trump excels in. He equates Ukraine with Russia. A journalist asks him tonight, what about the bombings over Christmas, the very heavy bombings on Kiev and other cities? What does this signify? Is Russia interested in peace? And he says, well, Ukraine is doing the same. Aren't they bombing Russia? I've heard that there have been attacks, so I will maybe discuss with Zelensky who's behind it. It's the moral equivocation. He doesn't make a distinction between the aggressor, the imperialist, and the defender, a European country defending itself. And this is what is disgusting. So when I watched it tonight, hoping against hope, that perhaps there would be a different tone given the strong European support and Canadian support behind Zelensky, that perhaps there would be a slightly different tone in Trump's statements, especially as he's under such heavy attacks at home, Epstein, the economy, falling ratings, etc., etc. But no, it's the same line, the kind of you have to give, he has to give, but we expect you to give more. The old sort of story behind the scene of he has the cards, I have the cards, you don't have the cards, Zelensky. Pathetic start.
We also heard some more from Mr. Trump. He said security agreements will be strong. What kind of security agreements are we looking at? Do we have any potential guesses about what could that be? What would Donald Trump have in mind?
I think it's all words at this stage. The only sure security guarantees are coming from Europe, as long as the Americans play along. The Europeans, with Germany and France, Poland, and others in the lead, they're prepared to sort of put their money and weapons where their mouth is. Trump is saying this, and I don't think he really means it unless Ukraine makes major concessions, that is, gives away a third of Ukraine and the Zaporizhzhia AS to joint control by Russians, Americans, and Ukrainians on Ukrainian territory. I mean, what he's saying is basically, yeah, we're willing to give you support, but you give in, you cave into Russia's demands and to what I've already negotiated or what Putin would like from me. Note the bottom line that is coming out more and more from Trump and Witkoff and the like. There's prosperity in store for Ukraine. You make the right deal, and this is going to be really good for your future economically, meaning it's going to be good for America. Europe's going to pay. We're going to get the dividends in America, which we'll share with Russia. I mean, we can't be fooled. We have to read between the lines and know what he's actually saying and what he means.
We have to read between the lines, and this is exactly what we're talking on the program. But we have not only heard from President Trump, we also heard after the talk, which according to the Kremlin took about an hour between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. We've heard from Kremlin foreign policy aide Ushakov, who said Putin and Trump think Ukraine needs to make a decision on Donbass without delay. Does this mean that the decision between Washington and the Kremlin was already made when it comes to what happens to Donbass, and now Ukraine will be pushed to either reject it and continue fighting without the U.S. support? How are we supposed to read into this statement?
I think you're right, and it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding by Trump and his cohorts about what this involves. Ukraine is and has said repeatedly prepared to go for a ceasefire along the existing lines, right? But Russia is pressing for Ukrainian unilateral evacuation from all of the Donbass region, which means all the defensive lines that Ukraine has built up in the last 3 or 4 years. They're very strong defensive lines, which the Russians haven't been able to penetrate, which would mean, leaving Ukraine open again to another attack in a year or 2 or 3 from Russia once Europe has got fed up and America has turned away from Ukraine. So Ukrainians are not stupid. They don't want to agree to this. And Trump is pretending that this is just an issue of, well, they've got it, they keep hold of it. But it's not just what they've got, the Russians. It's the additional territory where the defensive lines are now. Zelensky has said, we will not de jure legally accept the occupation and the acquisition as occurred with Crimea, say, of Ukrainian territory. We will agree to a ceasefire, and the future will decide what will happen eventually by diplomatic means, not war means. But Trump is basically playing into Moscow's hands by saying, give them everything they want, and be happy with what you've got. We'll support you. We're going to get a huge chunk of economic dividends from helping you in any case, but be happy with what you've got and be quiet.
But following what you just said, I mean, do you think that Ukraine could potentially really believe that those security guarantees are going to materialize when the need arrives, when the need occurs? I mean, is it fair to ask Ukraine to be able to trust the West, especially considering the Budapest Memorandum, then the failed Minsk Agreement? I mean, we've seen this pattern happening over and over again. So what security guarantee could be enough at this point to make Ukraine go and say, listen, we agree, let's sign?
Look, to put it crudely, not diplomatically, if there is full-hearted support from Europe, from the countries that matter in terms of diplomatic, financial, and military clout, that probably is enough. And, Europe will also have to face up to the fact that America is drifting away. And even if Trump is somehow removed for health reasons or other reasons, there are other, even more threatening and frightful perspectives with Vance taking over, who is even more rigid in his pro-Russian, anti-European, anti-Ukrainian stance. So Europe has to get its act together to stand strong. And what is encouraging about this meeting in Florida is that Zelensky has gone with full support from Europe and Canada in going into these discussions with Trump. Trump is aware of this. He knows he wants to be the only player. I'm the only one who decides, as he thinks. But that's not what the world is about anymore. Maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half, when Europe was sluggish, much of Europe was sluggish in supporting Ukraine. But right now, with Germany activated, with France, with Poland, with Scandinavian countries, Finland, I think Ukraine is in a stronger position to hold its ground than it ever was before during this war.
It brings to mind the recent words of Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who said that this could potentially be the end of Pax Americana. Just before we go, really shortly, we've heard from President Zelensky, who on his X platform posted on December 26th, a lot can be decided before the new year. Do you share the same belief as President Zelensky?
Well, we'll see today, but I don't expect too much. But again, the ball is now in Europe's court. Let's be honest. Trump is preoccupied with his own domestic problems, with his Epstein issues, falling ratings, etc. He would like to get a quick win, a quick coup in Ukraine, but Ukraine is not ready for that. I mean, too many people have died. Too much destruction has happened, and now Europe has woken up in this last year, and especially in the last 6 months. And Poland has been among those who has always told them, look, wake up, this is And fortunately, Britain, France, Germany, Scandinavia, Finland, as I've said, are strongly behind Ukraine. And that coalition of the willing is strong. And we have to rely on that and not so much on today's Washington. Hopefully, maybe things will change in Washington in a year or 2 or 3's time, but not at the moment.
Thank you very much. Bogdan Nahailo, editor-in-chief of Kyiv Post, was my guest on the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
And so this would be all the latest news now. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwinska, and please do stay tuned here to TVP World because we will be bringing you more details and latest developments on the meeting currently taking place in Florida between President Trump and President Zelensky. So stay tuned and good night.